I call this meeting to order and thank everyone for coming today, and appreciate the county representation here as well with Commissioner Price and Assistant Manager Sharon. Deputy, sorry, I got your title wrong. Well, we're glad you're here as well. Today, you notice that we have kind of a plain agenda. I said that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing, but we are here today to talk about our local current expense fund and our capital budget proposals that we have seen, and we have shared those with the county government a couple of weeks ago as well. Today, we know that we've got some decisions to make about what we're going to do as we move forward, because the county has not presented anything other than a meeting that we went to, was it past Monday? Yeah, the 13th. And at that time, we don't have any documents of the material that they did review that day. So we're operating with what we think that we heard and trying to move forward. So today our discussion is going to be looking at just a review of our budget that's been presented, and then have a discussion about any changes that we may have to make it this time. The caveat to that is that while we may make it won't be any concrete decisions, because we don't exactly know what the commissioner's budget is going to be and what their direction will be to us, because nothing has been formalized. I hope I presented that just to set the tone in the right direction, and guess we'll start with Barry if he'd like to make some comments.
Yeah, I'll just make some general comments and then I'll
Jeff.
turn it over to Jeff. But it's been indicated on the 13th, we went over to the county for their county manager's draft presentation of the budget to the county commissioners. And as it's been stated, we haven't received anything formally from them in terms of what that looks like, but the increase that was shared with us, the total increase for current expense and capital, was an increase of 1.5 million. And as you know, we presented our budget to them on the 14th, which was formally to them on the 14th, and we were requesting 2.3 increase on the current expense and 3 million increase on the capital, which brings us to 5.3 if you look at it in terms of what they being David Cotton, the county manager, what his proposal was 1.5 and our request being 5.3. So as you can see, there's a pretty good distance there between what we were requesting, what our needs are, versus what his initial proposal is to the county. So that's a difference of about $3.8 million. So I had some conversations with the county in terms of where we go from here, what does it look like. I don't think that there is, I think there's some room, it sounded like, in terms of some possible negotiations, but it looks like we're going to be well far away from the $5.3 million increase. So, and I'll turn it over to Jeff to give you some interpretations, I guess, from the meeting of the 13th.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.
But
Earl.
before Jeff begins, let's just have an agreement that if you have a question, let's don't be formal, let's just go ahead and ask it at the time, so it'll be fresh in everybody's mind.
To recap some of the highlights from the Commissioners' May 13 meeting, and we attended, not as participants, but just as observers there in the audience, and some of the information that I think is pertinent to our plans going forward that you should be aware of. First of all, the county manager presented towards the beginning of his session a lot of information about proposals for fund balance policy for the county, and we can certainly agree with them that fund balance is an important thing for governments to have, to make sure that they can weather storms and dealing with other issues that are important with fund balance. And so certainly support them in trying to make sure they have a solid fund balance and a plan for going forward. To outline some of the things that he had brought up, he said that they were looking at establishing a goal of having an unassigned fund balance in the general fund of all operating expenses at a 15% minimum within 5 years of adoption. And I think he mentioned that their operating expenses are over $200 million annually, so that would be a $30 million fund balance unassigned. That would be their goal. He also mentioned that they want to move their disaster contingency fund from the current $5 million to $10 million within 2 years of obtaining that 15% minimum fund balance on unassigned fund balance. So essentially between the two, the unassigned general fund balance and the disaster contingency, that would have them at about $40 million once they've fully reached their goal. Again, I think that's admirable. I think we all stand to sleep better at night knowing that they have a solid fund balance, and we too also need to have solid fund balances that we have experienced recently through the hurricane and needs there. Kind of looking at where things are currently, I think going in to this year, our unassigned fund balance was in the about $6.8, $6.9 million range. By contrast, the county, they had that disaster contingency of $5 million and then about $2 million in their general fund. So combined, they were a little over $7 million. So we're pretty much in the same sort of condition there, if you will, between contingency and unassigned. We don't separate ours out currently into a contingency for disasters. That puts pretty much on par in terms of nominal dollars. Our operating expenses for the year are actually larger than the county government, so on a percentage-wise basis, that would make ours a little smaller. So I can understand where he's coming from in trying to grow that over some period of time. Next, he went into revenue forecasts for the county, and he had mentioned that in the budget they were budgeting about $5 million from the revenue growth from property and sales tax combined. He had put $1 million of that related to property and $3.8 million related to sales tax. Now, he also mentioned that sales tax was up substantially, and he attributed that to purchases that were made after the hurricane, repairs and such that were going on there, and knowing that that's more of a one-time event, and so there was a kind of a spike there. But at the same time, on the property, with only the $1 million increase, that was much below what a normal year would have in property revenue increase because some of the property values had diminished after the storm. Now, of course, you would expect those to come back over time as people renovate and that sort of thing, and it goes back to previous values, as well as natural growth that comes along. So, I understand reluctance on their part to budget, all of the growth on the sales tax that went up at one time, but we have to also put that in contrast when you're only budgeting lower amount on the property tax, and that's going to come back over time. But there's probably some type of balancing act in there that needs to be looked at. The other thing is,
before you move off that
yes,
topic,
sir.
could I ask you, was there any discussion with regards to what percentage of healing had we done over the last year since the hurricane? Because if we've done 30%, that means 70% more healing to be done, which means that the sales tax could possibly still go up in the next year or two.
Right, and they didn't get into that level of specificity on that. In fact, the next thing I want to share with you kind of goes along with that, and in trying to seek some of that specificity is that he had mentioned something about a sales tax being up 12 to 13% due to these post-hurricane sales, but that, as I understood what he said, was he was only budgeting 3% of that into the budget. So and he equated that to the 3.8 million in sales tax growth. So if I heard that correctly, that would mean that there's quite a bit of, sales tax that has been realized that is going unbudgeted. And this may tie back into the previous discussion about trying to build fund balance. So, if this, would stand to reason that budgeting 3%, but there were 12 to 13% that came in, the 3% represented 3.8 million. Well, the 12 to 13% would represent, an additional about 12 million beyond that would be available. Now, I don't know that to be a fact, and from some preliminary discussions we've had with the county, I seem to think that the increase was maybe not to that level, but we haven't been able to ascertain exactly what that level is yet. But they're, I think, working on getting that information for us, and I think that would be helpful as you go forward in your deliberations to kind of know, what type of capacity that they may or may not have out there.
Was the heads and beds part of that 12%? Otherwise, the percentage that we get for every hotel stay,
No,
and
I
we
think that's
maxed out all the
that's
hotels.
separate.
Occupancy tax is separate than sales tax.
Separate.
Yeah, I think that's a whole separate issue. And
That-
again, I'd say, looking forward to getting some more information from the county on this, because I don't want to misrepresent or overstate something here, so we're waiting to get clarification on it.
See, we're trying to relate back to you what Earl, Steve was there, Brent, Jeff, myself, and Barry, what we heard, because we had to take notes, and he did a very good job of taking notes, by the way. He's probably real good in school. But
Don't talk to my teacher.
we don't have the figures or the presentation that was done, and you haven't received it yet, have you? And so we're speculating and assuming that we are correct in what we heard, what we think we heard.
For clarification purposes, the county manager made his presentation, a recommendation last Monday.
Mm-hmm.
He must have been basing that on some figures that he had already received, because you presented our budget
No, on Wednesday.
Yeah, they,
Formally,
Formally.
on the Wednesday after.
it was
On Wednesday.
actually, I sent it over on the 14th,
On Tuesday.
but they received the PowerPoint, as Ms. Russell's right here, and so I gave her a copy, and Jack, and who's
Royce
Royce
Bennett.
Bennett. They all three got a copy of it. So they had the information, the basic information prior to Monday.
Okay.
But the formal information with all the supporting
Right.
documents came on the
Right.
Tuesday after Monday.
So, if I may, just
Yeah.
because we have 3 or 4 people talking about dates. I understand what you're reporting to us. I know that we're taping our meeting today, this workshop. Is it possible for me to go back and review the workshop myself,
about the commissioners'
the
workshop.
commissioner's workshop?
I don't,
As
they
far as
didn't
I
take it.
understand, I don't think they taped that meeting, and I
I
don't.
was not able to go,
Yeah.
but I would have liked to have heard firsthand some of the information that you're talking about.
And I don't think there was any media there recording things either, I don't think, so.
Okay. And the information that you heard in the presentation that you heard was prior to the receipt of our budget and supporting documentation
That's
from
correct.
the superintendent's office.
That's right.
correct.
So
Correct.
the manager's proposal would have been, based on something not having our actual board-approved budgets in hand, because
We
those.
had the
those-
deadline, though.
Yeah, the deadline's the
Yeah.
15th. We submitted on the 14th, and but so I guess technically, he would not have that request for the 2.3 or the 3.
Right.
And at the time he drafted his proposal, so what the 1.5 was based upon, I don't know how they derived that, but that was the proposal, 1.5 total increase for current expense and capital combined.
And at this point, Dr. Collins, you have not received anything formal from the county on their budget at all.
No, sir.
So statutorily, the county manager has to present a budget to the commissioners by June 1 of each year. If our budget came to them after the presentation that we've heard about today, and we've not received anything in writing or have access to any public document in writing, at this point I'd say the county manager's budget's probably not finalized.
Right.
And he hasn't given his final recommendation. I would hope it's not finalized.
Well,
If he
we
didn't
would
have-
hope so, too.
If he didn't have our final budget until the 15th, then he couldn't present his final recommendation until after that,
Right.
before the commissioners. So I think there's still an opportunity for the commissioners to hear additional, dialogue with
Sure.
the school board. I had a conversation last night with one of the commissioners who wanted to ask a question about the roofing projects that we have before us. And I gave clarification that no, the roofs that are in the capital budget request are not roofs that are to be reimbursed by FEMA or our insurance company. These are 28-plus year roofs, 28 years old or older, and they're not the ones or portions of ones that were damaged by Hurricane Florence that we will otherwise get money for from insurance proceeds or FEMA. So, where you have the need for that type of clarification, that means that we have, a chance to give more dialogue.
Sure.
And I think Barry covered that in his introductory comments, that it is, we do believe that we can sit down at the table and reach some negotiation on what will be best for both parties. I don't think the commissioners are adverse to that at all.
And it would be hard for them to, fully consider our needs when what they heard is kind of an initial proposal from the manager, without having that information. But they do have that now. When it was sent on the 14th, it was also copied to this board and the Board of Commissioners. So they do have that information now that plays out those requests. And I appreciate you clarifying about the roofs, because that can be kind of a confusing topic with everything that we're doing through hurricane recovery with insurance, and that these are over and above that. These are not ones that were damaged that's going to be covered by insurance, but rather here's another portion of a roof that could be done at the same time the part that the insurance is covering. You could do this other part, and it might be 27 years old or whatever. It's in need of replacement, so you can get a better value if you can do the insurance covered part and the non-insurance covered part at one time.
All items on the capital outlay that were identified, we excluded anything that was being taken care of through insurance, FEMA, and or state-approved funds that for the hurricane damaged facilities.
And Mr. Myers, from your prior, or the superintendent's rather prior presentation from May 7th, we have 506 buildings, 285 are permanent structures and 221 are mobiles.
Yes,
So
sir.
we're looking at 26 roofs that require replacement that are in the worst shape and the oldest, absent and set apart from any insurance proceeds or FEMA.
That's correct.
Okay.
And so, going back to the manager's initial proposal information that he was sharing, I guess some of the clarification that we're seeking at this point with the county, and I'm sure they'll get back to us on that, is verifying, how much of a increase was there in sales tax that might be available for use. How much are they planning on putting towards their fund balance, at this time to meet these fund balance policies, and perhaps that's an area where there may be some room for them to provide funding above what that initial manager's proposal was within their current capacity. Again, we do support them beefing up their fund balance, but it doesn't necessarily have to all be in one year all at one time. It could be more gradual, particularly when you put it in light of the severe needs that the school system has now, and just trying to, make next year's operating costs be covered on next year's prices, and meeting some of the challenges we have there, and meeting some of these capital needs. So
What
we
was
look
the
forward.
term again for to the raising to the 30 million? Over what period of time?
It's within 5 years of adoption, and then I think they wanted the disaster recovery within
Within
2
2 years.
years after that. So I'm assuming they still have to adopt this or whatever, since he said within 5 years of adoption. So it sounds like that's part of their planning process as well.
So we're looking at, you said they have about the same fund balance as we had, about 7 million?
If you count their disaster contingency and their unassigned fund balance, I think their disaster contingency, I think it started the year with 5 and unassigned at 2. And then we don't split them like that on ours. We just have it all lumped into the unassigned. But that's what we had to use ours for, to cover some short-term needs on cash flow.
But if we're
there.
going to carry that out over a 5-year period, that would be approximately $5 million a year then, that they would increase every year to reach a 5-year plan, I would assume, if they're.
I'm not sure if they have it as a,
That sounds right.
Level each year, or some years more than others. I haven't seen a detailed plan on that, so I'm not sure how they plan to accomplish it. It could be that there was a large amount from the hurricane sales tax that is going in to fund it immediately, or may not. That I just don't. We don't have the numbers yet, but they're working on that for us.
Well, I kind of thought, maybe I misheard. I thought that's what they said they were doing, is taking part of, like 20% of that was the figure, and then the 5% of that would go into the disaster recovery fund, and the other would go into fund balance. Did I hear that wrong?
I don't know, I didn't see any microphones on the table, so I couldn't.
It'd probably be best at this point for us just to get clarification from the county rather than speculating. I mean, those are things I thought I heard, but I'd rather get their response
Well,
rather than speculate.
One thing we can talk about is our fund balance.
Right.
I mean, Mr. Hollamon, you've got to balance our budget, the local current expense fund. You have $6.8 million in fund balance appropriate.
Right.
Of that amount, how much do you anticipate we'll actually use by the end of the year?
And we're talking about in this year? Okay,
Or
so.
in this year, or in FY20?
Yeah, and let me also back up to last year as well. So we did a similar type approach last year, and it's the same thing that the county does. You budget out at your full cost for salaries and benefits and things like that, and you have some vacancies, and Mr. Cotton discussed this in his presentation as well, how through vacancies and savings that you accomplish, you roll much of that back in so you can reappropriate it in the next year. And keep in mind, fund balances, you're never going to hit exactly what's budgeted in a year. There are going to be some years where you're adding to fund balance a bit, and there are going to be some years where you're having to spend some of the fund balance. But what you're trying to do is, over the long haul, try to even that out, kind of even kill. And so, but you have to kind of look at where things are trending and where they're going. And this is probably partly what the county's facing. I think they've been trending down, so they're trying to trend back up. I can appreciate that. Last year, we used about $500,000 from our fund balance that didn't roll back in, and expecting it to be north of that this year. And so we're trending in that we're using it, so we've got to get on a mode of getting it back, leveling out again, because you can't keep plummeting, or you're going to run out. You use it one time, that dollar's gone. You can't reuse that dollar after it's been spent. So that's another reason why it's extremely important that the local current expense fund request that we had for the $2.3 million increase, that gets fully funded, because if we're not funding that fully, and we're already on this kind of downward trend of utilizing fund balance, it's just going to dig a deeper and deeper hole for us to get out of in future years.
Jeff, am I correct in saying that of that 2.3 million increase in the local current expense fund, that we have about $2 million that are unfunded mandates?
Right. Over $2 million is just going towards doing this year's services next year at the state salary increase levels and retirement costs, hospitalization costs, those type of things. Those hard costs that are built in that we can't avoid.
I know the county has that as well. It's not as much as ours, but it is as,
Question
and they have,
on the fund balance, the 6.8 million equals what percentage of our overall?
Well, and I have to go back and look. I want to say it was about 2 or 3. I might have it in here. It's a small number.
Okay,
Around
that's fine,
3%.
but as,
So
yeah, but in the former funding
of our operating
agreement,
expenses.
we could not exceed 8%.
That's correct.
And it was pretty much cut in half.
Yeah, that was never a hazard for us to go over the 8%.
So we're operating at 2 or 3%, and we're told before we couldn't go above 8, but the county is seeing the need for a 15
minimum of 15.
So that's one of the arguments that we had several years ago. We got 38 plus sites, plus this one. And we've had school fires, we've had, you name it. But I know the state and the feds love to play the game of reversion. They, whatever, they give you $1 and you give them 3. So that's the importance of to me, the fund balance. But when I heard Mr. Stout pretty much say that we were going broke quickly, that was a scary thing. And here we are skating on thin ice, and we're one hurricane away, or a nor'easter.
What are you pointing at me?
No, you're talking about the we're talking about
One hurricane away.
That's right. From
you're
those
talking about-
roofs.
we're hoping it's not
That-
going to be named Jeff.
Actually, the next one, guess what it's going to be named?
Barry.
Hurricane Barry. So we're one hurricane away.
What a year for that.
That's what I'm saying. We talk.
I'd like to speak to 2 things. What you just said,
Yeah.
and then Pam, something you said a moment ago. If I can cover yours first. You just said that the county's facing some of the same things that we're facing. They are. They are facing likely, I haven't seen any budget information, but likely property insurance increases, workers' compensation increases, those are typical. The employer's retirement cost, likely. Now, the state government retirement versus local government retirement, 2 different systems, but they're both administered through the state treasurer's office, so they could face some of the same things. But there are a couple of things in the $2 million increase that you mentioned that the county simply does not face. The county sets its own salary schedule. So $907,000 of that $2 million was a state mandated salary adjustment, because our employees are state employees, and we don't have control over them. We could have control perhaps over locally paid teachers and not adjusting their salaries, or maybe not actually, because they're still on the same state salary scale. And if you do try to do that, try hiring a teacher or putting one teacher in one classroom that's making 5% less than the same teacher, or a similar teachers teaching the same thing in the adjacent classroom.
Alec would probably be earning some money on that.
We'll spend it with our attorneys, right? So the other thing is state mandated employers' health insurance cost. The county is self-insured, so the county does not have the same state of North Carolina health system. I know particularly about that one because in my day job, we're insured through the state, and we're facing some of the same things that Onslow County Schools are. Now, Earl, to your point about fund balance, it's not a statutory requirement or a requirement by the Local Government Commission that school systems maintain an 8% fund balance. It is a requirement that municipalities and counties maintain an 8% fund balance in the state. Years ago, the discussion that you referenced happened with me sitting on the other side of the fence, okay? And we all knew that as a community, we believed, come together after any kind of disaster. And so as part of that original funding formula, the school system forward funded the capital outlay program by about $13 million. So $13 million of the then existing school system fund balance went into a capital construction reserve for schools. So that did drop the school system fund balance. So now we're below 8%. But I believe that during Hurricane Florence, before insurance funds came in and before there were appropriations from state government, Mr. Hollamon, how much of our fund balance had we committed or utilized?
All of it.
All of it. So we were 100% utilization after Hurricane Florence.
Right.
And now the only way, because this would be confusing to anybody really, if I said earlier that you've utilized $6.841 million to balance our budget and fund balance, but we used all of it after Florence, how do you have it to use now for the budget? And that's through the reimbursement of FEMA or insurance proceeds or state appropriations. So we forward funded, or I wasn't here then, but the school system forward funded recovery efforts and got money back.
That's right.
All right. Do you anticipate a vast quantity of additional money coming back? Or have we pretty much, in other words, are we going to continue to grow fund balance from additional sources of insurance revenues or anything like that? Or
No, the insurance monies, are paying for the losses, so, it's replacing the things that we got. So you're not gonna see a net gain from insurance. It's just gonna, cover replacement of what we lost.
and what legal capability does the school system have to generate revenue?
Outside of a bake sale.
Pepsi machine.
Drink machine?
We don't. We cannot, have any levy authority or anything like that. So we're totally dependent. Whereas, in many states there are independent districts that do have that authority. In North Carolina, we're totally dependent system, so we're dependent on state and local and federal governments.
Let me just interject what my thought process is on here. And I don't know how much more you have there. You've pretty much brought out what happened on the 13th. Ultimately, we will have a budget that's agreed upon or not between the two bodies. At the end of the day, we still have to continue our business entity, and we still have to pay for the things we have. I think that we need to look at the paradigm that we're currently using, and I've brought this up with Mr. Collins, talked a little bit with Pam, with regards to the funding positions. $2 million worth of funding positions that comes from the county for teacher and teacher assistant positions are funded by the county, and if we weren't funding those, we wouldn't have the additional costs of insurance, Social Security, and all of those. I've added all those up for all of the teacher and teacher assistant positions, and I think they come out to roughly about $2 million a year. If the state picked up those positions, we could then divert that $2 million over to other needs that we have, perhaps into the capital facilities needs. Or maybe we use it for a portion of what we need to bring on with the 3 goals that we have this year. But I think that's where we need to be focusing on. We can't guarantee what the county commissioners are going to do. We can only guarantee what we can do with the budget that we are presented. And I think that we need to look at real closely this year, and perhaps years in the future, of how we can either better utilize or divert the funding that we currently are utilizing for other things. When the legislature set up the process and said that school districts don't have the ability to raise their own funding, that the county is responsible for the facilities and the maintenance of those facilities, and that the state would be responsible for the educational aspect of a school district, the teacher positions, I don't know in what point our school district or other school districts accepted or adopted the policy that we would allow the county to pay for a portion of those positions. That ought to be on the state. And we ought to be pushing that through legislation or whatever we need to do to get that back on the state rolls. I think in this year, if we have, I think it was 200 vacancies that we've got for education this year, that we're currently hiring people for teacher positions. It would be conceivable to me that the 35 teachers and 21 teacher assistants that we currently have there, if we have vacancies in the school district, that we would assign those to the state-funded or federally funded programs as opposed to the local district funding those positions right now. And then we can tackle next year in where we would go from there. But that would be my focus, is try to utilize whatever funding balance that we have or whatever funding source we have to accommodate that. I think we all agreed, and we went back after that first session and agreed in the second session that we would increase the number of roofs because we have those needs. So I think that has to be the focus of our efforts, not only today but in the future. So whatever we can get from the county, a large portion of that, or whatever we get from our local expense fund, assuming that we can utilize those funds for capital, and I don't know why we wouldn't be able to at this point. I don't know of any statutory reason that says that you can't take those, because under the statutory requirements, the county's supposed to be funding maintenance and operations primarily. So if we're utilizing a portion of that for teaching positions, if we could temporarily move those over to state and federally funded positions, free up some of that money to assist us with the roofs in the event that we can't come to an agreement with the county on a full appropriation of what we've asked for.
That's a good point. Jeff, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just on the funding those positions, the teachers and teacher assistants, and first of all, I think everybody will agree that the state should be fully funding all the operating expenses of a school system, but that's not the way it works in practicality in North Carolina. We're already utilizing the funds that we get from the state in full. We utilize all those funds already, and that's why we have to have these additional positions in local, because there's not adequate funding in state to cover those. And so these are in addition to what the state provides.
Can you explain it a little bit more thoroughly? Because it's my understanding when the state sets out our requirements for positions here, they base it on student population, basically, number of facilities you got, and then they decide how many, not people you got, but they assign a one, what is it, the terminology that they use, it's a
Ratio?
it's a ratio of whatever we've got there, but they use a technical term for that,
Right.
that most manpower or management uses.
ADM allotment.
ADM.
The AD allotment, but what's the actual person, the person's requirement? It's
Like a FTE
one
or a
FTE,
full-time
one full-time
equivalent.
equivalent person for our ratio that we've got there. So it's the state's funding formula for that that actually causes the discourse that we have and allows us to have to go to the local expense budget and fund additional positions if we
Well-
find ourselves in the need for those.
So
Let me respond to that. I don't know of many things that we need that the state funds everything we need. And I can tell you I don't know of anything they do that with. And yes, we have an allotment. I'll give you an example. And we're not the only district who hires locally paid positions. I was asked to serve on an accreditation team when I was at White Oak High School. Went to New Hanover County, New Hanover High School, looking at their records. At that time, White Oak High School, we were right at 1,400 students before they built Northside. There was only a difference of like 18 students between our size and the size of New Hanover High School. So I was looking at their teacher allotment. They had 10 more teachers at New Hanover High School than I had at White Oak High School. I said, where does that come from? Locally. So we're not the only ones doing, that's having to be done everywhere, every administrative unit. If you want extra, then we have to find it.
Yeah.
That's happening. That's one thing. My other point is, and this concerns me, I've been sitting here being quiet. It concerns me about the sequence of the budget. As an old former football coach, I didn't make my game plan before I watched the films. I watched the films and found out what I needed to do. Then I came up with a budget. So it concerns me that a budget was given to us with an increase of 1.5 million without having an opportunity to look at our films and our situation. Not being critical, it just concerns me that that would happen. But to start cutting our locally paid positions, you better, what are you going to cut out? What needs are you going to cut out to take care of the students of Onslow County? You can't get it done with what the state just gives us. I wish we could, but I've never, in 39 years, I never saw that happen.
I'm just follow up. For those of us who have been in education for decades, and there's a particular court case called Leandro versus the state of North Carolina
Yes.
regarding trying to define a basic education. They've been arguing that case 25 years. I've lost count. And I think Judge Howard Manning, who used to be on that case, retired and was assigned to continue with it. So they're still arguing. I've always heard, and we have felt, our philosophy has been to protect the classroom as much as possible, to do whatever we had to do to make sure those kids are getting a quality education. I see these 78 positions as crucial.
Right.
The program support, the TAs. My children have gone through the program. I know what a TA meant to them. I know what it meant to that teacher. But whatever we can do to protect that classroom and to support that classroom with whatever. The state will provide you minimum, absolute minimum, and that's it. It's up to each county. That's why you have the Leandro, where you have the New Hanovers who could support it,
Right.
and the other counties, Jones and so forth, who could not. But every child across this state deserves a quality education, no matter where your zip code is. So I think moving these teachers and TAs out would be very detrimental. But I understand that the ledger part. I think I see that more as a ledger movement, other than people working with kids.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, this is another situation that concerns me. A lot of our elementary folks, teachers, they have no duty free. We have some of our programs without their teacher assistants. I don't know what we would do. We have teachers that have to get the teacher next door to sort of watch their class so they can go to the restroom.
That's true.
Am I right or wrong?
You're right.
How much more, you're going to take those people away? I had a young lady, a young teacher, is teaching for us this year, first year, moved here from Arizona. She was helping me serve food over at Catalyst Church during Florence. And she said, well, Mr. Wiggins, I'm going back to Arizona after this year. I said, why? We have a quality system, a progressive community. She says, I can't stand it. I'm stressed every day. I have no free time whatsoever. I go to lunch with my kids. I get no bathroom time. My teacher next door has to stand in my room and hers while I go to the restroom.
That's true.
Now, I've never taught elementary, but that's what I'm hearing. Is that right?
Jeff, would it be accurate to say that students don't come in nice packages of 19 or 22 or 16 or whatever the per? Is it accurate to say that wouldn't it be nice if every school, everybody showed up on day one and said, we promise we're not going to move, and we promise there are not going to be any more kids to come in?
Send them somewhere else.
Don't you think that we certainly need locally paid teachers and TAs, not only for what Mr. Wiggins is talking about, which is very important. I'm married to one of those elementary teachers, and I know that over the years, I'm sure she developed some health issues because of not being able to go to the bathroom and that kind of stuff, and along with many, many others. So I don't want us to get into this mathematical thing that, you know, we've got X number of teachers and man, they're going to fit in those classrooms perfectly, and that's just not the way it works when you're dealing with schools, and particularly when you're dealing with human beings, we don't, nothing is really, really perfect, and it doesn't always fit the formula. So I'm thinking many of these positions are certainly positions that enhance not only the students, which is the primary purpose why we're all here, but it certainly seems to me that we would need in certain schools, or maybe all schools, additional personnel just to kind of help this balancing act that you and CJ and all of us play in making sure that we can't have, it's impossible to have equity because of this business of somebody's got to decide that teacher, based on the allotment on the ADM, goes here, or does it go here because of 2 kids? We're not in an exact science. We're not turning out nuts and bolts. We're turning out people, and I get a little upset when people think everything can be dictated by some formula. So I'm thinking many of these positions that you mentioned, Bob, 35 teachers, 21 TAs is kind of is that correct? Have to do something with that. But plus we have some enhancement programs that other school systems wish they had. Particularly, I'm thinking some of these positions might be in the arts, might be in EC,
That's what I wanted to bring up.
which you've heard me say this before, and I really, really believe this. I think many times some of our military friends come here because they know that they are going to get services if their children require some exceptional children's services. So, am I speaking?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I think that's important that we understand that we just can't get into this business of
That
just
exceptional
numbers.
children's issue is a big issue. On our state exceptional children's funding, they don't fund you based on the number of children that you have that have a individualized education plan, IEP, and they cap it. It doesn't matter how many you got, 12.75% of your population is all they're gonna fund. We typically run around 14.5%.
Well,
So
How many
there's-
times have we heard unfunded mandates that the state and the federal government push on us?
Yeah.
Don't you think that by us having to use local expense funds, that's exactly what's happening here?
Yeah.
It's an
And we're required
unfunded
to
mandate
show
that's being pushed onto the counties,
Mm-hmm.
and it's money that we could use for other things that we need to do that.
exactly right.
They
So,
would fund it.
I don't have the magic bullet for that today, but I do think that we need to take a close look at that. That ought to be our emphasis
Yeah.
of pushing that back where it belongs. And if it's the state or the federal governments that aren't funding us adequately for what they're requiring us to do, then we shouldn't be accepting that in a county or in the county budget to take on that burden ourselves.
And Bob,
We need to
you're-
be pushing that off.
You're right, and I appreciate you, you mentioning this because it should be a state-funded, if it's needed, and the state should fund it. I think the federal government and the programs that we have, they fund their people pretty well out of their program. We don't.
When we,
Well,
when Mr. Taylor and I attended the Advocacy Institute in Washington DC, we met with Senator Burr and Tillis. They fund us at 15% where they had agreed to fund at 40%. So we're having to pick that up. All the guidelines and mandates that comes with that.
That's just been a way of life as long as I can remember being in education, underfunded mandates. Here we go again.
I will, and I'm glad we're having this discussion.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's on camera, so I hope that the community sees that we're not just saying we need 35 positions. We're explaining why, and it is something the state should do. I will say this in Mr. Hollamon's favor, is that he is a master at taking a locally funded position, and if he can change the codes and utilize it on the state level, he will do that. And then we might be able to hire 2 part-time TAs. He's really a master at that. I don't want to make him get a big head, but or give him another award, but he does that.
Madam Chair, can you say that differently? Because while the educators at this table understand what you just said. Any member of the public that just heard you will not know what in the world you're talking about. So if
And I'd be
I don't mean that in a
glad
bad
to.
way.
Yeah.
I mean it that every organization or profession has professional lingo and words.
Yes.
And those not in education will not understand that what you're talking about that Mr. Hollamon has done to save local tax dollars.
Right.
All right, Mr. Hunt.
It's okay, yeah. What you're referring to is, we have some of the allotments that come from the state that are positional allotments, rather than a dollar allotment. What that means is, they give you a position. You get 10 months of a position. And they don't care if you hire a 30-year veteran with a doctoral degree and you have to pay them on the state salary schedule up here, or whether you hire a brand new bachelor's degree right out of college graduate that's down here at the bottom of the state salary schedule. Either one of those that works for those 10 months costs you one position against that allotment. They'll pay the salary and the related benefits for that. Some of our other allotments, such as everything we get in the local current expense, and some of our other state allotments are dollar allotments. And you're going to pay, if you have that highest paid teacher, you're paying those highest paid dollars. The lowest paid teacher, you're paying the lowest paid dollars. So what we'll do in a lot of cases is, because the Exceptional Children's Program runs so far beyond what is provided just for strictly EC funding from the state, we will take some of their highest paid teachers and put them in that state positional allotment, costing us one position. We'll pull out that regular instruction teacher from there and put them into that locally funded one. So we're paying bottom salary rate on that one, the lowest rate we can pay, but we put the most expensive EC teacher into the ADM. And so we're gaining the difference between those, which ultimately saves the taxpayer dollars.
So to the extent possible, we make the state pay for our highest paid teachers.
That's right.
Correct.
And the lowest paid teachers, we cover some other way, maybe with local money.
That's
Yes.
And as people change, because we do have turnover, you're continuously shifting positions to always make the state pay
Maximize.
as much of the freight as we can.
That's right.
Very well
Is that
put,
right?
Mr.
That's
Hunt.
right.
Okay.
And they only pay the position, you
Right.
know.
But going back to Mr. Williams' comments, if we have those 35 local teacher positions and 21 assistant positions, and yet we also have 200 vacancies, it's not that we have 200 vacancies worth of state money that can absorb these 35 teachers and 21 assistants, because we've used 100% of the state money with people that are still on our books, normally being the highest paid people that we pay. We make the state pay for them.
Right.
So there's not availability on the state side to pick up local vacancies.
Right.
So we would either have locally paid positions, or we would have to do a reduction in force
Correct.
on teachers and or TAs if we want to lower our salary and benefit costs, which would be a resultant change in programming.
That's right. A drastic change.
Okay.
Definitely so.
And by law, we probably can't do that on the EC side
Correct.
of things.
Correct.
What percentage of teachers in the 35 or the 21 TAs are under that category?
We put the teachers are
The
all
EC.
first year teachers' bachelor degree.
Are they all EC from paid, are we paying for?
No.
Okay, that's the question I had.
What we're doing is we're taking the allotment that we get from the state on that positional allotment for teachers for our regular instruction. We're taking that regular instruction teacher out of there to free up a slot that we can stick a highly paid EC teacher into. And then we take that first year teacher and put it into that local.
But we're doing that because the state won't pick up the entire cost for all of our EC needs?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or all of our,
Partially, or
basically all of our teachers, all of
all
our
of
TAs.
them.
Other words, Bob, here again, it's like you said about this whole mandate business. They're mandating that we only have 12.75% of our kids who need extra help.
Right.
They're gonna mandate that. All right, you only can have 12.75% of your kids, even though we have 14, 15, something.
Plus, Mr. Williams, for example, at an elementary school, they may, it's not based on per school, it's the total number of
Yes.
students you have in the district is how they allot.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in a class you can only have 17 students, they have allotted 17, but let's say at that school, there are 19 students. Well, you can't use 1.2 teachers at that school, you use 2. So now you're already
right.
in the negative 0.8 teachers. And when that happens at multiple grade levels across multiple
Ripple
schools,
effect.
you come up negative teachers. Plus, at the elementary school, the state only allots 1/3 of the enhancement teachers for art, music, or PE.
Right.
The rest of those have to come out of local. They're not allotted by the state.
What I'm hearing then is the deficiency at the state level that requires us to perform
Yes.
it there.
Correct.
So that's where it needs to change.
Yes.
And mandates. So, starting with the most basic mandate, we must give every child an education.
True.
Another mandate, we have mandated class sizes. So, if you have to educate every child, and you can only put so many in a class, and we are not given enough money to hire the teachers to teach the number of children that we have coming in with a maximum number per class, where does the money come from? We can't raise our own money because we don't have that authority, so we have to go to the only other source there is, which is the local current expense budget, which goes to the county.
That's right.
Right.
So there's really no need in the county being upset at a Board of Education when a Board of Education is in a position of being surrounded by mandates and laws that dictate exactly what we do, how we do it, and how much we'll pay the people that do it.
Right.
Now, CJ, I know this is a question for you. Once our allotments are given in positions, they don't increase during the year. In other words, if we gained 300 more students, we don't get any more teachers after a certain date.
That's right, and actually Jeff may be able to respond to that, but
Yeah.
he'll tell you that often there's a reversion.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Mid-year
after
or
we've
whatever.
started the school year, we have to revert
Like
back
November.
positions to the
Yeah.
state.
Right.
And I would just add to what Mr. Hudson said, and Mr. Williams, it's not just, it's also the rigidity of some of the mandates that have not been as rigid in the past. And Dr. Collins can tell you too, the K-3 mandate, those class size maximums, those did not used to be hard and fast.
Right.
It used to be, we could look at an average across the district, and we still do that. But now we have individual class
yeah.
size maximums that are very strict and rigid, and at a small elementary school,
Oh, man.
you go one kid over, you can't be one kid over.
That's right.
But in the real world, it would be reasonable and correct to go one kid over there. But those rules are so rigid now that you cannot.
And what happens if we do go one kid over is that we have to pick up the salary of the superintendent.
I'm glad you know
Which
that.
the
I was
county
gonna
pays
share
for.
that with you.
Well,
Yeah,
and-
they,
And another person would say, well, if you're 1 or 2 or 3 kids over, why don't you just make them go to another school? But that's a redistricting process, and you're not
Yes.
going to go through a redistricting
Exactly.
process for 1, 2, 5. Normally, we'll be doing that soon enough as it is with overpopulation and the construction of new schools. But it is less intrusive into the lives of our community if we don't redistrict any more than we need to, based on whole classes having to move.
Well, it would split families if we didn't redistrict, and the other side of that is we would have to make a better decision than that, I think.
I just would also like to say, or have some, people do watch this, and we've thrown around some terms here that, with reduction and that we need to reassure our people out that we're in the middle of trying to recruit and hire, and we've got a lot of needs in that area. I don't want the message to get mistaken here that we're talking about cutting people.
Dr.
we've
Brennan,
never
with all
done
due
that.
respect, I don't know what we'll be talking about before the end of this budget process. So while I believe it's imperative to us that we provide every student an education. We're not to the point that we even have a budget from the county. So I'm not willing to say that anything is off the table, one way or the other. I think that we're faced with some really difficult choices, and obligations. The first obligation of which is to truly convey the budget and the needs, and now, as we've discussed today, the mandates that are beyond the control of the Board of Education. And I think that we need to be completely open and honest with every parent and every teacher and every TA and cafeteria worker, etc. And most especially of all, to be completely transparent and honest with the county commissioners that have to make a really hard decision. Let's not forget, on their side, they're also facing a new courthouse with new bailiffs and mental health issues and animal services and everything that's not an enterprise fund that's fairly self-supporting, like solid waste or the airport. I mean, they've got lots of things on their plate too.
Both of you, thank you for your comments, and CJ, I think that's important that we reassure our people that we're a quality school system and we're sitting here today because of it. Or we wouldn't be. If we didn't care, we wouldn't be here. And so thank you. And Jeff, thanks for interjecting that.
At the bottom of the page, when we get down to the bottom of the page of the book, we still are about $800,000 off on our local expense budget between what we submitted and what the preliminary is there. If we stayed with a $3 million capital budget this year, we're $800,000 off the other. Either we would be faced with having to reduce what our goals are for this year, the 3 primary areas that we talked about, and that we all agreed upon as budgetary areas that we wanted to focus on. But if we stay at the $3 million capital budget, I think it's imperative that we sit down with the county and work out a long-term, I'm talking about multiple years, way of funding our capital backlog, our needs for maintenance. That has to be imperative. We already have that similar program with building schools, and that seems to be working. But as we build schools, we've got 2 new that just came on over the last 2 years. 20 years from now, they're going to need a roof. And how are we going to pay for those when we can't even pay for those that we've got 28 to 40 years old right now? It's imperative that we come up with some type of a long-term program that we can do that. And I don't know what that is, but I do know that it's going to entail putting money away in the bank every year from the taxes, whether they be ad valorem, property taxes, or sales taxes, to fund that, because you just can't come up with it one day and say, well, we're going to pay for this. And I understand the dilemma that we're in right now with the hurricane. One more hurricane away, though.
Right.
Yep.
We're twice as bad off, and we're already bad off with what we've got. So we've got to come up with a program to fund that at some point. We can't just use the term kicking the can down the road.
And Bob, that's what we're counting on you and Ken and
I was getting ready to say, I think that is the purpose.
Earl to
You
do.
got it.
That is the purpose of our school funding committee, to begin looking at revising, updating, doing whatever for another funding agreement. And that's our goal. Right now, we're facing the issue of this gap year where we've got the needs and we've demonstrated those needs, we've validated and so forth, trying to get through this gap year. But hopefully we will address that. The meetings that I have been to at the state level, it's amazing how many school districts do have a funding formula. Even Jones County has one. They're getting ready to open up a new K-12 school, but they've had some issues with their commissioners, but they have come to an agreement we need to fund our schools. If you want the very best for our students, we need to be able to rely on something. This is why this funding agreement we had before, there was no guessing game. Now it's a guessing game. Like the times we used to go down to the courthouse and have one big dog and pony show.
Yeah.
But that is our job, and hopefully we can come back to an agreement and to move forward.
I just was whispering to Barry,
Yes.
how much of the Jones County School was actually funded by their county commissioners. And they do have a lower tax base, I guess, than we do, but it was a very small amount compared to what the state put in.
They have a smaller base, but their tax rates are actually higher than
Or
ours.
higher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, tax rate.
Yep.
But it's the, that, doesn't the value of the land have something to do with
Oh, yeah.
Like in
Well, the
Carteret
value-
County?
The tax base
Base.
itself.
Yeah.
I mean, Onslow County is so unique. I mean, we have a large population, a young population, a large number of young kids in the population.
Yeah.
That means education is fairly heavy here, and yet we've got a large land mass that's not taxable and that we don't get sales tax off of. If we had the tax base of New Hanover County, which is substantially smaller geographically, you know, 1 penny on our tax rate here is probably 1.2, 1.3 million, maybe 1.4 million now, just depending on what it is. It's gone up a little bit since I was over there, but in New Hanover County, a penny on the tax rate would have yielded $3 or $4 million, just based on the heavy commercial
Yes, yes.
aspect of the county. So I think one thing that's important to keep taxes low, which we are all about, I would hope, is continued responsible commercial and industrial development, so that the commercial and industrial citizens of the county, those corporate entities, bear a percentage of the tax burden, not just every mom and pop and residential home. And to get that, we've got to have, as we learned through economic development, a really good system of education, because that's one of the draws for industrial recruitment.
If we don't have a quality program, they're not coming.
It really, in a way, it's kind of chicken or egg.
That's it. Well, Jeff, I know we've interrupted you, so.
Was he talking?
Well, basically, I was just wanting to recap what we heard at the commissioners meeting, so you'd be aware of that, bring you up to speed on that, and let you know that we are in the process of trying to obtain additional information that may be helpful as you go through this process, moving along, and also making sure that we're available to share information with the county, since they didn't have that at the time that the manager gave his initial proposal, and hopefully they can weigh all this information about our needs as they make decisions.
Do we know when they're going to have their hearing?
Glad you asked that. I had mentioned that. So they have a public hearing scheduled for June the 3rd. And I think the budget, I guess, will be presented to the commissioners at that date. And then,
Hold on. Is that right?
The public hearing's gonna be at the second meeting in June.
the
17th.
17th. Okay. Okay. So would the budget be available?
June.
The budget has to be made available to the commissioners no later than June 1st, and it will be published and be on our website and be available at the main library and at the clerk's office at that point.
Okay.
June 1st.
June 1st.
And I think Mr. Cotton had indicated that the plan was to try to adopt the budget at the June 17 meeting. Is that right? Okay. And I don't know if there are any other budget meetings planned, or those are the only ones that I had been aware of at this point. I don't know if you have any other.
Not that I'm aware of.
Ms. Russell, will we receive any correspondence from the county as to a formal proposal to us, or anything of that nature?
I would have to check with our Board of Commissioners and our county manager before I answered that question.
Thanks.
So as I understand it, June 1st, the budget will be available for the public to review, but the hearing won't be until the 17th. Okay. And the approval also is tentatively for the 17th.
That is correct.
Okay.
Earl?
Did you?
That was all I had.
Can we go back and recap? Bob, Mr. Williams brought up some figures and so forth. Again, basically, mandated increases about 1.8 million, plus some other increases, property, works, right at $2 million. And our capital outlay, you first came in with 3.8 million initially.
800,000 above the 3 million.
Yeah,
that we
right,
were-
800,000, but we came back and supported a much bigger increase because of the needs, and we all supported that.
Right.
But going back to that 3.8, the 800 above what we currently get.
Right.
I think you said this was the absolute minimum. Is that something to that effect?
Yes, yeah.
So we're looking at mandated increase 1.8 million. Okay, and 800,000 or 828 for the capital outlay increase. We're looking at about 2.4 million. And they've offered 1.5 for everything.
Right.
So hopefully between now and then, we can at least negotiate something, if not more, with that, because the needs are not going to go away. Our fund balance, you already said we're about 3%. So you're skating on thin ice now as it is.
Well, and the amount of fund balance that we used last year.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just heard from the county that there are no more budget hearings or budget meetings going to be held for the commissioners between now and June 1st. So at what point are we going to negotiate if there's no more hearings? Because it is the commissioners that ultimately would have to get that input and change that. So I don't see anything changing between now and then.
Well, I think the board needs to direct Dr. Collins and Mr. Hollamon to make contact with the county manager or with county government, even if it's through Commissioner Bright, to see if they can't sit down and work some negotiation out and bring back to our board, because ultimately we will have to approve any negotiating that is done. At the same time, I just want to remind everyone of the state funding formula, which is, according to Mr. Hollamon's calculations, would be about $3.1 million, which is only for the local current expense fund. That's something to put, in your mind and think about. With nothing, the formula does not address anything in the capital. And I think we're fighting for both the capital and the local current expense fund, but that number only applies to that. We still need as much as we can get of our requested amount from on the capital side.
Two other things real quick. The $13 million that we had to provide to the county, I understand that's still there in a debt fund, is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Okay.
When we,
I don't,
well,
I mean,
I'm not hooked into ATS anymore,
Right.
but I can tell you that.
I believe,
It's a reserve fund for school construction. It was a designated fund. I'm sure it's there with interest being accrued to
I
the fund
think
itself.
county manager
for
mentioned
future
that
debt
it
service.
has accumulated.
when we met with them, well, our staff did, not us, but we met with them following Florence and was requesting some money. I believe that that's exactly what he said, that it's gone up to 18 million now, and it is there. I'm almost positive he said that, but that meeting was taped. We could certainly go back and look at that.
But if the funding formula is now dissolved, does that money automatically come back?
I would not think so, and the reason I would not think so is because we still have an agreement with the county to build additional facilities. We're going to build additional, so pulling that 13 million or the accumulated 18, if it's gone up to that, would jeopardize our future capital improvement program significantly.
And the last item was I think both our board and the commissioners signed resolutions for a 1/4-cent sales tax. And that's been sent to our representatives, and nobody wants a tax increase, but everybody's in agreement of the 1/4-cent sales tax.
Yeah, I think they did put in that bill that that
House Bill
could
667.
Yeah, that it could be dedicated to education if they want to do it that route. And I believe quarter cent, I think raises about $4.1 million, dollars, if I recall correctly.
Well, for those who have expertise in that area, if I'm not mistaken, I was told that our local delegation had to agree.
That is correct. If it's a local bill.
It's a local bill, but in House 667, the Board of County Commissioners may direct the County Board of Elections to conduct an advisory referendum on the question of whether to levy. So is that still in play about the local delegation?
I
I
don't
thought,
think,
I thought that was a statewide bill.
that's a
That's a
statewide bill.
statewide bill,
Yeah,
but
so,
back,
I
would
don't
that,
know.
would anybody,
Mark, do
I
you
think-
know?
think that
Think it
bill, is
passed.
that the bill that just passed the House? That, now the Senate hasn't taken it up yet, my understanding.
But do you know if that the local delegation would have to approve it?
No, that was a statewide bill
Okay.
that allowed a quarter cent suspect.
If I recall correctly, on the third reading, it was approved with no opposition from representation from Onslow County. I have to go back and double check that, but I believe there was no representatives from Onslow who opposed that bill. I think there were only about 5 statewide, if you look at the third reading.
Any other comments or questions, concerns? Well, we've had a good discussion. I don't know that we've solved anything, but we have had a good discussion. I think we have explained what our status is and what we feel that we need and have asked for that. I think we've also explained that we understand that we want to continue a positive relationship with our Board of Commissioners, and I know they do with us as well. At the same time, we know that we're going to have to sit down and have some kind of negotiation talks with them, and I believe that, from my part, I think that Dr. Collins as well as Jeff can do that. So if the board would like to make any other comments about that, can we approve that by acclamation?
I'm not sure what we're approving, Madam Chair.
For them to go into discussion on negotiating the amount of money that we are requesting. It would still have to come back to us, but somebody's got to do it. We can't sit here. What do you suggest, Jeff?
Well, I'm just thinking that the Board of Commissioners, if no other budget workshops are planned or no other joint meetings with the Board of Education, the manager has still not made his recommendation. So it's still appropriate for the superintendent and the manager to talk, because that could change the manager's recommendation. After the manager makes a recommendation to the board, it's left his hands, and it's gone to the Board of Commissioners. And at that point in time, it would be incumbent upon the Board of Commissioners to either seek further information, clarification, or for us to have dialogue with commissioners directly, with or without staff, before they made a decision. If they are planning, if the only other thing that I've heard today is a June 17th public hearing, which would have, I'm sure, a per speaker time limit. So there'd be a time period not to exceed 3 or 5 minutes, probably. Normally there is. And then after that, a possible adoption. Then absent further dialogue, this thing's going to be over in one night, with limited opportunity for the commissioners to hear additional information that might let them make a good informed decision about the budget. So I think it's appropriate that at staff, it's a staff-to-staff thing right now.
Well, that's what I said.
I
that
didn't
they meet.
understand that, but
I did say that.
I make a motion that we try to set up a meeting for negotiations.
Is there a second on that? Any discussion?
I believe staff to staff is the best, instead of getting individual interpretations, whatever. These folks have worked very closely together, and they can pretty much sing off the same page, so I feel very comfortable with that.
The public will have adequate time on the 17th, whether it's a time limit or otherwise, to provide input. But my experience is that once, just like our hearing, once we put the budget together and we have the public hearing, we're pretty much at that point where it's done. So we can go and we can cuss and discuss if we want to, but it's not going to change the outcome. I think it's totally appropriate that we try to, if we're going to have a dialogue, it has to be before June 1st.
I agree. And I think those things can be worked out, and I think that it'll come back looking different. It may not be everything that we want, but I think that, you know, I've related it to this, like begging your dad for an increase in your allowance. You have to, instead of asking for $1, you might get 50 cents and happy. But I think we need to have a respectful meeting, and I believe these two gentlemen can. And we've had any other discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Gentlemen, thank you for being able to do that. Earl had given a handout.
Yeah.
Earl had given a handout. I had asked him a couple of questions about some legislative bills. It's not on the agenda, but for information purposes, he's made this, and that'll kind of show you some comparisons. I'm gonna let him speak to it.
On Friday, the Board of Directors for the North Carolina School Board Association met, and we spent about 3 hours going over a lot of legislative updates. I didn't create this handout, I can assure you. Leanne Winter, she pretty much lives down on Jones Street, but I just thought you can, instead of going down on the website trying to pick certain bills, she gives you a sort of a synopsis, crossover bills and things that, bills that the School Board Association is supporting. So all of this is still up in the air and so forth, but we spent quite a bit of time talking about 3 or 4 specific bills because we were asked to get some input from our staff and to take back, and Dr. Folger and some others were very good about providing responses. Very quickly, one was House Bill 377, reduced testing regarding the graduation requirement. At one point, the state mandated it for everybody, then they rescinded that and sort of made it optional. Now, House Bill 377 wants to prohibit graduation projects for all school systems, and we probably spoke 30, 45 minutes on that. And the reason Leanne brought this back, Paul, was when Mr. Reddick and I were at the policy, Ms. Thomas, about how beneficial it is for us. But there was a lot of positive discussion about the requirement. As a matter of fact, one board member from Wilkes County, whose representative is the one who's sponsoring the bill, pretty much said that his daughter-in-law, stepdaughter, Junior, is complaining about it, so he's decided to make it prohibited to having a graduation project.
And that's the way bills become laws.
Yeah. So anyway, one of the board members from Alamance County said they had a low-performing high school and getting ready to be taken over. But anyway, they went back and reinstated the graduation project, and now it's the top-performing school. Just that mentality, that attitude. So about everybody said they have it, they support it, and it should be an option. The other bill that they talked about was the 30 minutes of duty-free lunchtime. That came up again. So again, somebody complained, and now, well, you've cut TAs, you've cut this, now where are you going to get them? So we'll see what happens with that. The other one that really, selection of instructional materials, the adoption of textbooks, they want to allow each LEA responsibility to have their own textbook adoptions, which means the cost of textbooks, the time that's involved in adopting textbooks is just absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, those are just some things that we talked about, and I can assure you, Leanne Winter and her staff are down at Jones Street just really working on behalf of all school systems across the state, so we're just very glad they're there.
You know, every year we have a stack of bills that really relate just to education, and we can't fight every battle for every one of the battles for every one of those bills. I encourage each board member to try to look at them as best you can. Look at those legislative reviews that you get weekly, and if we have if we have need to sit down one day and just have lunch together. I know Jeff works, and he's been very gracious about giving of his time, but the rest of us kinda are flexible. If we could just sit down and have lunch and talk about some of the issues of bills, and we'll know the direction this board ought to take in having one voice for this whole board to address with our legislators.
That's a good idea.
I would caution us that when we're looking at the bills, until they get to the other chamber,
That's right.
Yeah.
and even after they get to the other chamber, nothing is firm until the third reading. And frequently, they will take a bill that the House sends to the Senate, gut it,
Rewrite it.
put a new topic on it, and send it forward, and it comes out because it has, the bill itself has crossed over. It's met the crossover deadline.
Yep.
But the bill that comes out has nothing to do with the topical matter.
Yep.
that it went
I
to
think
the
I said
chamber.
that Monday to a group of teachers. So, but I do think we need to pay attention to them because I just feel so unprepared to discuss them with not really knowing what's going to happen. So, y'all, it's been a great meeting. Love seeing y'all, and I know that we have a lot on our plates as far as things to do the end of the school year. Good things are going on, and if you have an opportunity, there are plenty of banquets, and I guarantee you that they have good desserts at those banquets. So, have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, each of you, for your comments. I got it.